Hello, everybody. My name is Iris van den Akker, and I will be talking in three parts. Firstly, I'll introduce myself, tell a little bit about my background and how I came to be here. Secondly, I'll talk about sustainable business planning, beyond survival. How do you plan for that? And I'll round off with a call for action. So let me start first with introducing myself. I possess a whopping 20 years of financial and business advisory experience in the banking sector. Since the end of 2019, I took a short career break, and since then I've been putting my experience and my knowledge to the benefit of the cultural sector. As David already mentioned, as a volunteer in the costume atelier of Het Nationale Theater and as senior associate with efesai. But also I'm in conversations about director positions in the sector and for advisory, supervisory board roles. And although I provide an outside view in, I think it's good to realize that the cultural sector actually, well, I think that not only my heart, but also my brain has fallen in love with the sector before and after COVID, I have to say. But let me get back to my experience as a banker. I gained quite a bit of experience on whether or not to finance organizations. I advised numerous organizations to become more attractive to external funders, whether it banks or investors or funds or even private equity. I also guided a lot of organizations with plans to become more financial healthy in the future after a period of distress or when they had, for instance, exponential growth plans. To explain it even in more simple terms, when you extend a loan to an organization, you do this based on the ability and probability of that organization to pay back that money. Now, that doesn't happen at the same day that you extend that loan. That only happens in the future. And that is where my interest grew immensely to really understand how organizations plan to remain relevant in the future. And that brings me to sustainable business planning. Beautiful terminology, but what does it really mean? I'll get into that in a minute, because I think that before we do so, I think that it's good to understand that I recognize that at this moment in time, we probably, especially in the Netherlands, are already in process or are executing our crisis plans for the second time this year related to COVID. And I think it's an appeal to look at how, whilst we address this crisis, also start navigating for a sustainable future. It was something that David also already alluded to in his introduction. How do we think about medium and longer term? And how do we compose a plan, a sustainable plan, beyond survival? What are the steps that we need to make? Now, if I talk about business planning, linking it to what David was saying, when you have found your DNA and your true value, your full value, you've set about a strategy and you know what you want to do, this is where a business plan comes in. Because how you're going to do this, exactly what you're going to do this and how you're going to do this, how long it will take, what you will need to be able to execute those plans, you will actually put into your business plan. Sometimes you also think about the challenges that you might face in the future and incorporate these in your business plan. Think about macroeconomic changes, for instance. As an example, your customers have less money to spend because of an economic downturn or rapid changes in technology that we foresee that might actually open up different channels to approach our customers. But even, unfortunately, also epidemics fall into that category. How do we deal with those in those plans? Now, if I talk about sustainability in this perspective, what is meant by that? Well, the simplest way really is to explain it by the three Ps. You might know them: profit, people, and planet. But just to run through them quickly, profit is the economic impact. It could be either positive or negative. For instance, employment, or on a higher level, the way that we contribute or add value to our gross national product of a country. The people side of it relates to social impact. Also, that could be positive or negative. It could include all the activities that have an impact on your employees, on your customers, on your communities, on your suppliers even. And the planet part, the last part, is the environmental impact. Again, this can also be a positive or a negative impact. You might think in this area about your own operations, for instance, how you will manage waste could be an example. Now, if we talk about a sustainable business plan, we actually talk about planning for the future, incorporating all three elements in a balanced way. So both profit, but also planet and people. So not just the economic aspect of things. And pay attention to this when you next write a business plan. It's not only to arrange for funding. Better yet, I actually strongly believe that they could be reinforcing each other, these three Ps. For instance, if there is at a certain point in time a CO2 tax, which is something done to enforce the impact that we have as organizations in the planet area, in the environmental impact, that might raise our cost. Have we considered that in our future plans? It might be something to think about. Now, as a banker, I judged thousands of loan applications on a yearly basis. I looked at numerous investments plans for small companies, startups, scale-ups, family companies, as well as large international companies. And I learned that only looking at past financial results is not sufficient. What is actually far more interesting is to learn how companies address their future and the future changes that they want to make and that they need to have. And with this, I think I need to remove a myth, especially speaking as a banker. I learned that only looking at financial return, how money is made, is not the only determining factor, for a successful and a relevant organization in the future. And let me illustrate this by two examples. The first one, I worked a lot with the retail sector. And in the retail sector, you can think of companies like shops that sell goods like fashion or appliances or even pet food. They could be the mom and pop shops at the corner of your street or the large commercial brands that you see in city centers. This sector has been encountering a lot of changes, but I think the most disruptive one has been the internet, leading to e-commerce and online purchasing developments. And therewith came the question, is a retail company still relevant if it doesn't include an online strategy for the future? And to take another angle, that large commercial brand that looks financially healthy at that moment in time and thinks about putting an online strategy in place, has that company incorporated the pros and the cons of doing so from an environmental perspective? To make that even more clear, has it made a comparison what the environmental impact is by letting the customers come to his shop compared to moving all the products that he or she has purchased to those customers to their doorstep around the country? Now, those are impacts that it needs to consider in its business plan and really think about what the impact of those are. A second example I would like to make is IKEA. Probably everybody knows IKEA. They actually call themselves a cheap flat pack furniture producer and seller. And they recognize that that is done with a lower than average quality. Now, IKEA also realizes that it's a big contributor to waste. waste because furniture is made, bought, used, and then trashed. So they've put themselves to a challenge to become more circular. And in short, there's much more to do with it, but in short, what it really means is that they would like their furniture to be reusable. Now, let me draw you a picture here. I don't know if you guys know the Billy cupboard of IKEA. Well, I've been putting a few of those together, and I have to say I'm not very good at it. But just to imagine having a Billy cupboard that has been put together, taking that apart again and reassemble it for a second usage, that is not only a challenge for me, but I think also for that particular Billy cupboard of IKEA. So IKEA will need to turn that around, and that has an impact in a lot of their cost and benefit structures, the way that they operate, and the way that they plan their business for the future. Now, at this point of time, you might think, very nice, but what and how does this relate to cultural organizations? Because these are all organizations that are geared towards profit. They've got leverage, they've got overheads, they might even have easier access to funding. So how does this relate to the cultural sector? A sector that is not necessarily driven by money or financial return. Let me let you into a little secret, because a lot of companies that are geared towards making profits struggle a lot with this sustainability planning and incorporating the people and planet part, because they've been for years looking at how to monetize things. And yes, you can blame their shareholders for that, partly, probably. But all their activities and things that they do are being translated into what it means for their profit. And then it becomes very hard to think about what their impact is on a people and planet perspective. Let me illustrate it again with an example. If you have a company that is heavily dependent on a product that is made abroad in a factory where there are poor working conditions, but that product is of a very low price, and that gives you that competitive advantage in the market. If you were to have to shift to another product because you don't want to allow for those poor working conditions, think about long working hours, bad conditions to work in that might be dangerous for the workers, and you need to switch to a more expensive product, well, you would probably make your competitors happy, but probably not your shareholders. So it's very hard to make those kind of decisions and changes in your organization if you are so trained to look at mainly profit. And this is, I think, where exactly the opportunity lies for organizations in a not-for-profit sector. And with that, for cultural organizations, because we as cultural organizations have as main drivers those non-economical impacts. David already mentioned a few, but just to iterate a couple. We bring cultural heritage and art of a certain era or a dance style to a broader audience. We enrich and inspire people. We offer insights about certain difficult social themes. We bring enjoyment. All of those are impact on people, the social impact level. And to take this further with a few other suggestions on the planet side, on the environmental impact. If you own a building, as David also already mentioned, have you ever looked at the energy label and how you could improve that energy label? It might save you some costs in the near future. Or do you know what your carbon footprint is of yourself or your employees, the team that you work in? How do you travel? But also, if you still plan a program, performance, or an exposition, could you incorporate some of those big environmental challenges like global warmth or the plastic soup? Now, these examples, a little bit by purpose, might not be new to you, but what might be new to you is to incorporate them in your business plan to make it a sustainable business plan. Because there is my call for action to round off my talk. If we were, as cultural organizations, able to bring our organization and our activities more transparent to the forefront on our impact that we make, not only on the economical side, but also on the social side and on the planet side, we become more sustainable for the future. And I think even our current stakeholders might be very interested to learn more about those impacts, and even maybe monitor them going forward into how we improve them or how we make them bigger or smaller over time. And better even, we might attract some new stakeholders, maybe new funders, like impact investors. One of the series that is, or the seminars that is still to come will go into this, or even new audiences. Now, if that sounds interesting to you, I suggest that you respond to this call for action, and start with that sustainable business planning and become prepared for beyond survival.